We're just two clever people saying witty things and entertaining the masses. I'm more worried about myself.
I mean, I presented things, so it's just a different format.
Yeah, it's basically the same thing. All right, well, let's do it. What's up, UX fam? How's your mom and them? Welcome to another episode of Beyond UX Design. I'm Jeremy. If you're new here, welcome to the show. I am super stoked to have you. And if you haven't done it already, please consider subscribing to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you are regular here and you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would really appreciate you leaving a 5-star review. That'll help me out way more than you can imagine. And for this week's audiobook recommendation, I've got Cues by Vanessa Van Edwards. I did a brief overview of Cues back in episode 7, Speak with Confidence, Make Your Voice Heard. But I only scratched the surface of cues, and Vanessa talks all about everything from body language to vocal patterns to shed light into the cues that we're giving off to those around us. And the audiobook is narrated by Vanessa too, so that's awesome. So head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/audible trial to start your 30-day free trial and download Cues completely free. I've partnered with audible.com, so anytime you start a free trial, you'll help to support the show, and there's no obligation, and you can cancel anytime and still support the show. And as always, thanks so much to Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, and Kevin for all their support. And if you want to join these fine folks and help keep the show independent and ad-free, you can become a patron for as little as $3 a month. That's less than $1 an episode. And if you do that, you'll get some sweet, sweet perks for your support. And of course, if you think the show is worth sharing, then for the love of God, tell your mom and them about it. All right, y'all. So I have got an awesome guest today. I am really excited. Another guest that I met randomly on LinkedIn. I don't remember how we came across each other, Marnina. She was a UXer turned product manager. So today we're going to talk to her about her journey into product management to the dark side. I'm really excited about that. Marnina is a former Torontonian. Is that Torontonian? Did I say that right? Currently living in Israel with her husband, her 3 kids, and about 1 million plants. And while she has always loved design, her favorite part of the process has always been what happened before putting pen to paper. And eventually she abandoned her job as a designer at a medical device company in exchange for a PhD in design and psychology, and has been asking way too many questions ever since, which sounds like both a designer and a product manager. So I'm really interested in hearing about that today. So Marnina, welcome to the show. I am so excited to have you on. How's it going?
It's good. I'm happy to be here.
Product management from UX design, and you got a PhD too, which is fascinating. So before we get into all this and your journey in the product management, I would love to know a little bit about you, just in general, your background, PhD, how'd you get that? What made you get the PhD? I want to know everything. Start from the beginning, if you could.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I've always liked learning new things. Like I've always said, I make a hobby out of trying new hobbies. And
I like that.
So, 1,000 years ago when I was like, what should I do with the rest of my life? I wanted something where I could always be learning new things, and design felt like that kind of a career. But even before I finished design school, I figured out that while everything I was learning there was great and seems applicable in so many ways, that I didn't see myself having a career as a designer. And so while I did give it a try, I figured I got the degree, I have the skills, I may as well try it out. After about a year, I was like, I'm done. So I didn't, quit right away, but I went back to school sort of part-time while I was still working, kind of faded into it a little bit. And I realized that I like doing the research and I like doing the strategy. And especially in Israel, because I moved to Israel after my bachelor's degree. And they're always kind of a little bit behind here in terms of process innovation. So they're really good with technological innovation. They're always on the cutting edge. Everything's just kind of chaotic here. And so they don't invest in processes quite as much.
Okay.
And so the whole field of UX and design research, and it's always a little bit behind where it is in North America. So there weren't really, this was in 2014, 15, there weren't really jobs in, UX research or in design research. So I was like, I like school. Let's go back to school. And so I did. And I did.
Right on.
Yeah,
Okay.
I studied the impact of constraints on the creative process.
Fascinating.
Specifically, the timing of when constraints are introduced into the process, how that affects creativity. And
Wow.
it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's cool. So you did your, I don't really know much about getting a doctorate, but your I guess thesis would be a master's degree. What do they call it when you get a doctorate? Is it called a dissertation? Yeah. So you did your whole dissertation about the impact. Oh, that's fascinating. What was that like getting a PhD in design?
I don't know how to answer that.
I don't even know if that's really a question.
I've
it's
never
a weird
gotten a
question.
PhD in anything else.
Yeah. How do you compare it? Yeah, that's a silly question, I guess. Yeah. I guess well, let me ask this. What was it like getting a PhD in general? Was it as challenging as you might think getting a PhD is, or did you find it to be easier since you sort of embraced that creativity from the beginning?
So I will say one of the advisors I worked with, I also did my master's thesis with. We had a really good relationship. In addition, I had my first kid about like 11 months in, and my second kid 2 days after I got my doctorate.
Good Lord.
And yeah, planned C-sections are good for something, I guess.
Sure, yeah. At least you can schedule
Which isn't
them.
why I did it. But what I was going to say is that you hear a lot about how doctorates and parenting don't go hand in hand and how tough that is. Whereas in Israel's a very like family-oriented kind of place. And so everybody is having kids when they're doing doctorates. Wow, okay. It's like totally normal, totally standard. There's like legally, there are maternity leave policies for graduate students. So I didn't have that uphill battle in terms of like trying to balance academia and my personal life. So that was helpful.
So there's a somewhat progressive in that sense. I don't even know if that would be considered progressive. Seems progressive to me, but
it's a weird combination of like progressive, but also the opposite in a way.
Well, I'm curious, how'd you end up in Israel? You have family there, or did you decide you wanted to move to Israel? I assume you're Jewish.
I'm Jewish. It was always something that was a possibility. I came on my own, but my family followed me.
Wow. Okay. Do you have a support network like grandparents and stuff?
So yeah, I came and then my brothers came and then we had all got married and had kids and then our parents came.
Oh, wow. That's so cool. So from Toronto to Israel, that's a fascinating journey even on its own. You could probably talk for an hour about that alone, but we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about your journey from UX design into product management. So let me ask you this. So you got out, you finished your PhD and were you looking specifically for a UX research role or were you looking for just kind of anything in the UX realm of roles?
So like anyone who finishes a PhD, I would say, I was suffering from a little Stockholm syndrome.
Really?
Academia doesn't prepare you for the real world. Academia assumes you are just going to stay in academia for the rest of eternity. And so I was debating, well, do I want to do a postdoc? Do I want to look for a job? I don't know what's going on. But at least here in Israel, if you want to remain in academia, you have to do a postdoc abroad. And I had a baby 2 days after finishing my doctorate. So I wasn't going to start like going places at that point. So I was like, okay, I'll get a job. I'll keep connections with the academic life. So I was teaching a course on design thinking and I was on an organizing committee for a conference. And I started working as a design researcher specifically for like marketing and consumer insight, and then got laid off because of COVID. And so after that, I was like, okay, now's the time to finally like get back to design and find a job as a UX researcher. And I did that for 2 years before getting laid off again.
Oh, geez. Oh, God, what a ride. Okay. And so is that how you ended up in product management then, looking for another job again and then not being able to find a UX design role? So just sort of saying, screw this, I'm done.
Yeah, it was actually something I started thinking of while in that role as a UX researcher, because it's a small field. And there's really not, especially, again, Israel, we're behind in these things. There's not a lot of room for growth. And I would, have conversations with my manager about like, how I can progress in my career. And I didn't see it happening at the company that I was currently at, but I was also happy there. And I was like, okay, so where can I go next? And even like looking outside of the company, the number of like management roles in UX research is extremely limited. So your options are, stay an independent contributor for the rest of eternity, get super, super lucky, or take a more general like design management role. And I like mentoring people. I like teaching people. I like delegating. Like I like all those things that go into, leadership positions. And so I knew it was something I wanted, but I also like the last time I drew a wireframe was literally like with a pen and paper. And then you would like make the design on Photoshop and you would give it to the developer who would like slice it up. Like I just hadn't done any of that stuff in like a decade and so much has changed. So I didn't see myself going back to more like general design. So yeah, I was like, product management seems like the natural place to go.
Now, you said something a second ago I want to follow up on. You said you were like, I'm done. I felt like I was just done. What happened? Was there something that happened that made you say, to hell with this, I'm out? Or was it just a number of things that just sort of bubbled up? I'm curious what happened there.
You mean with design?
With UX design, yeah.
With design, like I was never great at designing.
Okay.
Like execution was not where my skill set shone, I guess you could say. And I recognize that. And I like thinking, I like talking to people, I like asking questions, I like coming up with ideas. Once that idea is in my head, I'm done.
I'll put it on paper, let someone else make it pretty. Yeah,
exactly.
And it's funny because I've had conversations with a lot of people. I know I've seen you post on LinkedIn, and I know some of the people that you interact with, you follow. I'm sure share this opinion. But when I see people with the UX UI thing, it blows my mind that people still in 2023 think these things should be combined. Not to say people can't do both, obviously, but like they're very different skill sets. And yes, you can do both, and yes, you can be good at both, and yes, both are very important. But that doesn't mean every single person getting a job as a UX designer is proficient. But that's something that was kind of interesting. You sort of started to look at that and think, maybe this other thing is for me. So I'm curious though, when you started to think about this product design role, was it the fact that, a lot of times I've heard people say things like, oh, we don't get a seat at the table, and I want to be able to have an input in the requirements and the discovery and things like that. And often the product team tends to get that responsibility. Was that sort of part of your line of thinking, or what was it that, had you kind of looking at this product management role?
So when I kind of just like looked around at what was out there, a lot of the things I liked most about UX research in many companies were done by product managers. So talking to customers and sort of mapping out the product roadmap, coming up with, different KPIs and success metrics. And at the same time, there were just so many more options for product managers and so much more room to sort of grow and progress in your career. So that's kind of what led me to looking into that.
Well, so let me ask you this. Your journey from UX design into product management. Talk a little bit about that job search and dealing with recruiters, dealing with hiring managers. I think one of the advantages, you probably don't need a portfolio, I would assume. But what was that conversation like with recruiters and hiring managers as you were looking for these jobs? Having that background in UX, was that something they found valuable, or was that something that, people kind of looked at as an asset?
The truth is, I only spoke to 7 different companies about product management roles where I applied to significantly more than that. So with 2 of those companies, I got the interviews because I was well connected, and it wasn't because of my CV. It was because somebody vouched for me to the hiring manager. And with 2 companies, they were not calling to interview me for product management roles at all. They were calling to interview me for other roles. So in one case, I applied for a product manager role, got like the automatic rejection email, then applied for a competitive intelligence role. And when they called to interview me, I was like, well, actually, I really wanted the product manager role. That time it did not work. The next time, somebody just submitted my CV for a UX design role, and they called me for an interview. And my plan was like, okay, I'll talk to this person. I know people who are looking for designer roles. So I'll say, oh, I have this friend. And she mentioned offhand that they have an open product manager role. And I was like, I would like to interview for that, please. And I convinced her, and, she passed on my information to the hiring manager, and she was interested in talking to me. And then, so it was only, I think, 3 roles where I sent in a CV and got a call back.
Okay. Now, did you get any feedback from anybody, or did they just ghost you every time with absolutely no feedback about what it was that they thought made you unqualified for that role?
So in one case, I think in two cases, they didn't kind of like what I did for the task. In one case, they found someone who was asking for less money.
Oh, geez. Okay.
They're like, we really liked you, but this person was
You're
cheaper.
too expensive. Yeah, right. Yeah.
I'm
We're
like,
going to go
all
with the
right,
budget
fine.
option. All right, good.
I can't
Dodged a
argue with
bullet
that.
there. Yeah, right. I think you dodged a bullet.
And in one case, I knew it was never going to happen. It was at like a large cybersecurity company. There was just like way too much of like a knowledge gap. But a friend was a recruiter there, and she was like, "You need to talk to this person." So I went in to that interview with like, "This is an informational interview. This is not a real interview." And in one case, they decided not to hire for the role. So I didn't really come away with that much useful information.
Really? I mean, nothing at all. I mean, I'm just curious. Like, it's because to me, I feel like maybe I'm biased here, I guess, because I'm a UX designer, but I feel like UX designers bring so much value to that role of product manager. And I guess it's maybe it's not shocking. Maybe it's exactly what you would expect. Maybe that's what's wrong with software today. But I'm just sort of like disgusted, maybe a good word, that like that wasn't something that people found value in. And it sounds like nobody really even blinked an eye at that. I don't know. Am I wrong there? I don't know. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
So I don't think it's that people didn't find value in having a UX background, but at the end of the day, they're like one of the central parts of the role is being able to sort of write these specs and communicate them to the dev team.
The technical part of it,
and
right?
You can be the greatest UX person in the world, but if you don't have the right relationship with your developers and you can't communicate using their language to them,
sure, yeah.
it's going to be hard to be successful. So I was lucky in that in my previous role as a UX researcher, I did work very closely with the dev team. I was always bringing them into the work that I was doing or hanging out in their dailies. And we also had a project where we integrated in product surveys. So I worked directly with like the dev team to help integrate that software into our platform. So I had written a couple Jira tickets and I was like, yeah, I've used Jira. I know what I'm doing.
The hiring process, you had a couple interviews, you got rejected from a few. Obviously, one of them worked. I'm curious, how did you sell yourself? How did you position yourself in that one interview that worked out for you to get them to offer you that role? What was that positioning statement?
I don't remember specifically what the positioning statement is, but again, emphasizing that relationship with the dev team and your ability to detail your thoughts and features and ideas and be really explicit about what needs to happen is, hugely important. I think another thing that people are concerned about is when you are a UX researcher, you're not in charge. You're not really a bottleneck. You can kind of exist under the radar a bit, and you can't do that as a product manager. And so you have to be very sort of firm in your conviction that like, I am okay being in charge. I can be in charge. I can make the decisions. I can make sure things happen on time. So that was really important.
It's interesting because I've actually had this thought, and I've had a conversation with one of my colleagues at work. My role right now is experience architect, which is kind of high level-ish. I'm not doing wireframes. I'm not doing designs anymore. It's very strategic. It's when I can get in on the meetings, when people include me. And it's very much like there's a lot of overlap between some of the things that the product managers would do in the discovery phase and the things that an architect would do. And I had a conversation recently with somebody, and they were like, that sounds like what you want to do. That sounds like a product manager. And I was like, maybe. So what? Like, let me do that. I mean, I don't care. Call me what you want, So I've actually had this kind of thought myself. One of the reasons I really want to have you on was I've had these same kind of like urges, I guess, if you want to call them that, to go to the product management side. So I'm curious, in your new role, you got the job, you got the new role, you started out. I'm curious how you approach this. And how did you approach like onboarding? I know you posted on LinkedIn a lot of patience, a lot of asking stupid questions and things like that. But tell me a little bit about your process. How did you approach taking on a completely new role?
So, I mean, I started the role less than a month ago, so I'm still in that process.
Yeah.
So, yeah, as you said, like there's just a lot of asking questions, and I think I'm not done with the asking questions because I'm still in the stage where I don't know everything that I don't know yet.
Are we ever really done? Are we ever really done?
Fair enough. So I don't even know half the questions I should be asking. But, just being really upfront with people about I have never done this before. This is what I have done before. Here's where I can contribute. Here's where I'm going to need your help. Here's where I'm still learning. But at the same time, nothing that I've been told to do, none of the tasks or projects that I'm working on sound all that scary or foreign either. So they're all I'm okay, this is I haven't done this, but I get it.
So one of the things that has kept me from going into product management is the technical piece, the story writing, the very technical documentation of things, the business requirements and those kinds of things. The real nitty gritty, the acceptance writing acceptance criteria in a story, for instance, that's the kind of stuff that sort of scares me a little bit. What I like is the high level, macro, the ideation, the discovery, the questioning and things like that you're saying. I'm curious, in your role now, are you doing sort of both of those, or is it more strategic, less of the tactical kind of execution, or is it a mix, or how are you approaching?
Definitely a mix. Yeah. Even just things that I would have never even thought of. Going through the terms of service and seeing how we need to update those. Not something I ever even it's not that I never saw myself doing it. It's that I never considered that as a piece of the puzzle. It's just not something that ever crossed my mind even.
All right. Well, that's fascinating. Well, let me ask you this. How do you approach that piece? It sounds like it was, like you said, it was something you never considered. I guess it's just part of the job. You're just doing it now. But how do you approach that? Because I feel like for me, I don't know, I have ADD, and I don't know if you do or not, but a lot of people out there, I know that designers do. And that frightens them a little bit. That's sort of very, what's the right word? I'm at a loss for words today.
Detail oriented.
Well, detail oriented, sort of, I guess, but I was going to say the minuscule kind of making sure you're
minutia.
The minutia, that's the word I was looking for. Yes. The minutia is so, a lot of times for me, my brain just sort of glosses over that kind of thing. I'm curious. I don't know if you have ADD, like I said, but is that something that you've kind of struggled with coming from that sort of high level thinking research role and having to do some of this more technical stuff? How's that transition been for you? Has that been easy, you found, or hard, or?
Legal stuff is definitely foreign to me, but I'm also not doing it on my own. You work with lawyers and they know what they're doing. But in terms of the more nitty gritty minutia, it's not my favorite, but it's also not foreign to me. You do a doctorate and you have hundreds of people participating in your experiments and Excel spreadsheets and SPSS page, and then you have to make sense of it and turn it into something. So you get used to details.
Yeah. I guess it is something you just sort of get used to. Because that's kind of the thing, for me, again, one of the things that I actually, a couple of months back, we had a role open at work for a director of product management. And I had a few people approach me and say, you should go for that role. And I just thought it's a lot of budgets. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of headcount and planning. And the planning part I'm okay with, but the planning for the budgets and the planning for the headcount and, I don't know, that kind of thing definitely scared me off a little bit. Because it's funny, it kind of parallels a little bit. Before I got into design, I was actually going to school for economics. And I really loved macroeconomics, the high level kind of thinking about the economy. And it was very philosophical and how, psychology, how humans interact and things like that. And then I had a microeconomics class, which is, taking all those curves that you look at, the supply and demand curves, and actually calculating them. And it's funny because there's parallels there for me. It was I like the high level thinking, but then when I had to get down in the minutia of calculating the curves, it honestly scared the crap out of me, which is still kind of why I'm kind of in UX design today, because I don't have to do, the math and the counting and things like that.
But every job has that element. It just manifests differently.
That's true. Yeah. There's minutia. And
you have to figure out the lesser of all the evils.
That's right. So, well, let me ask you this. In your new role, are you able to apply any of your UX background to this new role? You mentioned, being asking questions and things. I assume that's kind of shining here, right? What are your thoughts?
So it's a really small company. Well, it's a small company that was acquired by a bigger company, but still functions as its own like independent business unit. And so the product managers all, draw their own wireframes and mock-ups. And so, yes, definitely still getting to apply that UX knowledge. And they actually just, one of the designers just started like this whole UX research project. So I'm like, I can help you there.
That's awesome.
So we have, a talk scheduled for tomorrow or something like that.
Right on. Now, I actually, my next question was going to be, what's it like working with researchers and designers now in your new role when that's not your job? And I'm sure you want to be like, I want to do it, or I could do it better, or I have a different idea. Is that hard? Is that really hard? I imagine that'd be very hard for me. I'm curious what's like for you.
Working with designers, not as a designer, that I'm like an old hand at this point, because that's what I've been doing for the past couple of years. So this will be my first foray into working with a researcher, not as a researcher. I'm hoping it will be good and collaborative.
It's funny because before when you and I were talking, you're like, I've only been in it for a month. I'm like, that's perfect because I want to talk about your transition while that's like still fresh in your mind. And then 6 months from now, a year from now, we'll have a follow-up. And then you come back on and talk about all the stuff you've learned in the last year. In your new role, how are the other people, the stakeholders, everybody else, do they know about your UX background? Do they appreciate that? Is that something that's come up in conversation, or is that something they couldn't care less about?
No, I think they definitely appreciate it. It's a small group of people. And because it's a small group of people, they really try to leverage people's talents and skill sets. And so it's definitely, I think, a really good place to end up. But I also when looking, I didn't apply to every product manager role that I saw. Like there's a ton of product manager roles, and so many of them, I'm like, this is not for me. I do not belong in this place. And so as I saw it, there were the companies who don't really care about user experience or have something like super duper technical where just the learning curve would have been out of control. So I didn't apply to those jobs. Then you have companies with like a much higher UX maturity where the product team is relying heavily on the UX team. And so they don't get to really get their hands wet, feet wet.
Oh, wow, that's
wet,
fascinating. Okay.
What is?
Yeah.
What's the phrase?
Feet wet, feet wet.
Feet wet.
Hands wet. Hands and feet wet. Get on there. Get on there.
They don't get to go swimming.
Yeah, sure.
So yeah, so there, the product manager role doesn't involve as much of this sort of UX stuff that I still like and I still enjoy and I still want to be doing. So for me, the goal was to find a company that valued UX, but had a low UX maturity so I could do a bit of both.
I love that. Yeah. Yeah. Now that's fascinating because my next follow-up question was going to be, what was it that you were trying to avoid in some of these companies? You just answered the question for me. But I love that because that way you can help kind of mold that UX process. And as you said, in Israel, they're somewhat low on the process maturity, I guess. But that's kind of interesting. I love that because that kind of gets you thinking about also too, what I love about that is you're playing chess right now. You're thinking, what's my next move? Where do I go in the company, right? Is that kind of, maybe I'm putting words in your head, but that sounds like you're sort of helping yourself sort of establish an expertise in this field so that you could maybe, it sounds like, move up in the next thing and help plan that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, at this point, I'm really just let's figure everything out.
Let's take it month by month. So
exactly.
Yeah.
But prior to starting, that was definitely something that factored in, how, where I want to find a place where I do have that sort of upward mobility, but I still get to do all the things that I enjoy doing.
Now, you called out something that I think is just worth stressing for everybody out there, regardless of if they are a junior designer looking for a UX role, UI role, UX UI role, product manager, product designer, whatever role they're looking for. You looked for the companies that fit your values. And that to me is something I feel like, not obviously people are doing it, but I see so seldomly maybe, and people hunting for jobs where they do the mass spray and pray, apply to 100 roles and hope I get one person call me back. You took your time. And it's funny because you mentioned you only applied to 7 roles you said, or you heard back from 7?
No. I only heard back from 7 product manager roles. I interviewed for other roles as well.
But you didn't, it seems like, at least, correct me if I'm wrong, you didn't do the spray and pray. You were very precise. Or you did both?
No,
you did a little
and
both?
yes,
Okay.
I did both. So the way I approached it was, if there was a role that I was really interested in, I made an effort to get like a warm lead, have someone refer me. It's a small country. It's not hard to find someone who knows someone, even if you don't. But I also then kind of just applied to any role whose job description kind of fit what I had previously described as these sort of more customer-centric type of product manager roles. And the company I ended up getting a job with was actually one of those that I never heard of them, no idea what they did, didn't really look into it until I had the interview. And then I just had that first interview with the hiring manager. And I'm like, this is someone I can see myself working for. I like this person, and kind of just went from there.
Yeah, I think that's so underrated. Like, I like this manager. I want to work for them. That to me is something so few people actually just like, again, regardless of the role, that will help you just in so many ways. I mean, it'll help you enjoy your job. It'll probably help you with raises in the future, promotions in the future, being able to do your job. They'll help you do your job if you're having trouble or you're getting blocked by somebody. That is something like so few people, I feel like they just like kind of will do anything they can to just impress whatever hiring panel they end up on. And they don't really critically think about what happens if I actually get this job? What will it mean for me if I actually get this job? Do I actually want this job?
Yeah.
So I love that you put that in there.
So it's funny because, like, as I said, I didn't look into the role before I applied. I saw the job description fit what I was looking for. I applied. And then when I had an interview scheduled, only then did I start looking into the company. And I'm like, oh, this is kind of like a bizarre industry, but whatever. Like, I already said yes to the interview. And so, as I said, like, I had the interview. I really liked the hiring manager. And so when I was talking about this experience afterwards and throughout the interview process, it was really interesting to see that there was like this split between people who understood why I was interested and who saw like value in like having really good mentorship, and people who were just like, yeah, but like, why do you want to work in that industry? And I was like, but who cares? Like, that's like the least important thing. Like, the most important thing is that you're getting to do like the work you want to do, and you're working with people who, value your skill set and who can help you grow.
One of the things that, as you've been in here for like a month, I'm curious, I know you haven't learned everything you need to do yet, but what skills do you feel like you were missing? You talked about like having the skills of asking questions like that, but as a product manager, UX designer or UXer turned product manager, what did you feel like you were missing, like you needed to work on the most in the last month, the 30 days you've been working there?
I think prioritization is probably one of the most important skills a product manager has. And I'm not horrible at prioritizing, but in previous roles, it wasn't something I had to do constantly. Whereas here, it's like, it's every minute you're kind of thinking about like how you can prioritize between all these different moving parts. And so it's going from like short little prioritization sprints, like, okay, what am I going to do this week? What are my priorities? To like this like never-ending prioritization marathon.
Well, let me ask you this. In your role, because I've seen product managers function in different capacities across different teams. Some teams I've worked on have had scrum masters along with product managers, and the scrum masters will kind of, facilitate all the scrum events, scrum ceremonies, things like that, backlog grooming, refinement, things like that. And then others, the product manager kind of functions in that role. How does your role kind of relate to that sort of aspect of agile? Are you more like kind of taking on what some of the scrum masters would do and you're facilitating a lot of those meetings as well? Or is it more just sort of like coming up with requirements and documenting, make sure scrum master knows that and they do their thing?
So yes, it is doing all that stuff, but they also just hired an R&D project manager who started this week.
Project manager, okay.
We will see kind of what they end up doing and how that impacts the product department.
Yeah, so that's fascinating. So an R&D project manager. So in that case, generally, I guess like my I used to work in advertising. So we had project managers then. And, they're dealing more with timelines and making sure that you're on time and on budget and things like that. And product managers tend to facilitate more of the conversations around the requirements, more like business analysts kind of. So yeah, it's interesting. I don't know, like how does that, what is R&D, when they say R&D, research and development, obviously, but are they like sort of testing new products or new things to sell or implement, or is that, I guess you don't know yet because they haven't started.
Yeah, I don't even know if they know yet.
Fascinating.
Like
Okay.
in my previous company, we had a number of different product teams who all kind of did their own thing. And so they eventually brought in an R&D project manager, or I don't know if that was her title, but that was
like that.
basically something like that,
Sure.
Who kind of made sure that all the different product teams were working on the same sort of timelines and that everyone knew what everyone else was doing. And so it wasn't like a scrum master or any of those very specific things, but it was similar style role.
Well, that's, the other fascinating thing about software is that the ways teams work, the way that teams work across all the various software teams, they're all totally different. It's like nearly impossible to say this is how every team is going to work. This is how every team should do it. So anyway, it's just fascinating to get an insight into just one team and how that one team does it. Do you feel like with some of this, like you mentioned before, Israel having this culture of sort of, being further behind in process, are you able to influence that in some way in your role now? Do you feel like that's something you're able to do, or are they just sort of anti-process in general because that's sort of the culture?
So actually, the R&D team is all based in Ukraine. I think some in Slovakia because of the situation in Ukraine. So they're not Israeli. And actually, in my previous company, half the R&D team was in Israel and half the R&D team was in Ukraine. But the team that I worked most closely with was also in Ukraine. So I'm used to that. But I think people in general seem pretty open. Again, I think it's not a startup. It's a company that's been around for a long time, but it's quite scrappy.
That's always fun too, as a place to grow. It's sort of one of the advantages of a startup. Like when, I tell people a lot when you're starting out, try to find a startup because it's kind of cool because find a startup that has other people that you can learn from. You're not the only one. But if you can find that little small, scrappy company, you get to do a lot more. You can be more flexible in what you do, how you do it. You can change. You can iterate more often. You could try out different things, see what you like, see what you don't like. And it sounds like that's sort of the environment that you're in today with this sort of small team. You're learning, you're growing, you have the ability to grow and change and mold your role to suit, your skill set. And, it sounds like everybody, your team's very, very, what's the right word? Very open to that and very accommodating, which is awesome. So I'm curious, one of the last questions, what have you learned so far in your 30 days? I'm going to ask you this again when we talk in a year, but what have you learned so far as a noob product manager that you didn't expect, something new, something you never expected?
I think that whole constantly having to prioritize things, also just being kind of more empathetic to that whole process and why there's not as much reliance on user researchers as we would like there to be.
You've seen behind the curtains.
Yeah, exactly. And I think also, it's going to be different at companies at different stages. So as I said, this is a company it's been around for a while. So and a lot of the people who work there have been there for a very long time. Like the CTO has been there for 15 years. So they really know their customers. And so they might not be relying on research all the time, but they're constantly getting feedback from the customers. They know the industry, they know the product. And so it's not like they're just making stuff up and guessing. And so, you see, and again, it's not going to apply to necessarily every company, but it kind of makes you see where companies might benefit more from UX research and where we're kind of just, I don't know a good phrase, but where we're...
Not winging it, but intuition maybe? Relying on intuition?
No, not intuition, but where UX research might be less necessary.
Less critical kind of, right, okay.
Yeah. Or it might be less feasible to integrate UX research, because when you come into a company and that's your whole role, you want to be involved in everything and you want to do it all. And again, like, yes, you prioritize, but you prioritize things according to like your perspective and not necessarily according to, not without having that understanding of the rest of the team's understanding of the users.
Yeah. I mean, I've been in UX design for, I don't know, a long time, 10 years, 12, 13 years, long time. And one of the things I've seen, like almost without fail, over and over again over the years, is that, and this is true, I guess, for everybody. It's not just UX, but everybody on the software team, I'll say this because I don't want to just call out UX people. Everybody on the software team tends to have this grandiose sort of understanding of their job, and they think that their job is the most important job in the whole team. And you couldn't do this without me, right? And everybody thinks they're the most important player on the team. And it's interesting when you go and you're sort of making this sort of statement. You're saying like, oh, I used to like advocate for this, or I don't want to put words in your mouth again, but it sounds like you're sort of rethinking some of that kind of, we have to do this every single time, and if we don't, we're going to fail, and blah, 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 and so that's kind of fascinating. I'm curious, what has been, I don't know, maybe one really interesting thing that you saw that you were like, oh, I get it now. Like, that's why they always tried to skip this thing, or that's why they always tried to do this thing. Is there something that you've seen in your 30 days so far that's been like, I don't know, light bulb is maybe giving it too much credit, but something that you're saying, like, you're peeking behind the curtains, you're like, oh, I get it.
Yeah, I don't know if there's been like one particular light bulb moment, but at some point I had read some like, and this is a while back, some post on LinkedIn that was talking about how, as designers, we're always talking about how good we are at problem solving.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
But like what differentiates us is not our problem solving ability. It's our like visual skills. Yeah. And that everyone is good at problem solving.
Yes.
And so like, it's true. Like, we have conversations where the data person's giving these ideas and the president of the company is giving those ideas and the customer support person's giving these ideas, and everyone kind of has that seat at the problem solving table. And it's not, I don't even know if like the people from the UX team are in that conversation, but it's true. Like everyone is good at problem solving. And so, I mean, not everyone, but it doesn't matter what your title is, you can still be good at problem solving. And so that is not enough of a differentiator. You also have to have like some core skills that, set you apart from everyone else. And so coming in to this role, not as part of a UX team, kind of highlighted like, yes, problem solving is happening everywhere.
It's funny you mentioned that because I have always found that to be somewhat insulting to people, right? Like, oh, I'm the problem solver. Like, well, product managers are problem solvers. Back-end engineers are solving problems. Front-end engineers are solving problems. Stakeholders, product owners, they're all solving problems. Like it's kind of insulting to assume that you're the only one solving problems. Everybody else is just like farting around, not doing anything. So I love that you mentioned that too, because it's so critical. And I love that you're building empathy for like these other teams too. And I'm curious, do you ever see yourself going back to UX in the future, or do you feel like this is something you're just going to do for a little bit? Do you ever think you're maybe, never say never, I guess, but anyway, I'm just curious. You ever see yourself going back, or you ever feel like you're going, I miss it, I want to go back? I don't know.
I have no idea.
It's too soon to tell.
Yeah. But
I mean, 30 days in. That's a question I'll ask you in a year.
I've also never held the same role more than once. So
okay. That's interesting insight. Yeah.
I worked as a designer at a medical device company doing kind of all the design. So, branding and editorial and device interfaces, like whatever it was. And then, I went back to school, and then I finished and I was doing consumer insights research. And then I was doing UX research, and now I'm doing product management. So I've never actually held the same role more than once. So
yeah, that's fascinating, because we could have had a conversation. We could have had a conversation with you, like, well, how'd you get into, going from all these other roles into UX? So that's fascinating. You're like all over the place, but you've got like, I think that's going to be huge though in 5, 10, 15 years, whenever. And you've got all this experience and empathy that you've been able to build for all these other roles in the team. As UX designers, we always talk about empathy for users, and very rarely does anyone think about empathy for the people they work with every day.
Yeah.
So, what better way to build empathy than to walk in their shoes? So I love that you're doing that. That's fascinating. Well, I can't wait to have you back on a year from now. We'll have to book it and get you back on. And we'll talk again in a year and see if you're still digging it or you're still learning new stuff. I'm sure you will be learning all kinds of new things over the next year. So that's awesome. Well, anything else before we end this today? And I'd love to get your thought. Anything else that we're missing you think is just, if anybody is looking to switch from UX to product manager, do you have any tips, any advice, anything to share? Anything we didn't talk about today?
So I think it is somebody who is still in their current role, try to find any excuse to work directly with the dev team. I think that's really important. It's something that everyone asked me about, and it was the thing that people were most skeptical about. So if you have stories about that, that's what you want to emphasize on your CV. And if you don't have experience in that and you can get that experience, do it. And I think also just trying to understand sort of the language and terminology that product managers use and apply that to both your CV and also your case studies. So, instead of presenting a case study as you would present a UX case study, you want to do things like rewrite your insights into user stories, or just so you can show that you can put together that sort of documentation.
Now, this is something it didn't even occur to me to ask because I just assumed they wouldn't ask. But did the interviews you go on, did they look for a website, case studies, things like that? Or did they just kind of look at a resume?
So with, I think, one interview, I had to present a case study. And I took the case study that I had already prepared for a UX research role, and I applied all of my knowledge of what a product manager does, and I reformatted it accordingly.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I honestly, I just assumed, maybe obviously incorrectly, that this was something that they didn't even have. They just looked at like a resume and asked you to kind of talk through a thing. But I guess even if that's not something someone requires, it still seems like a really great advantage having that background in UX to be able to speak to your work and the outcomes and the value that you brought. That to me seems like, why wouldn't you do that? Even if they don't ask, like that seems like a perfect thing to just take and present.
Exactly. Like I mean, in that case, I was asked, but I had also I'd done the work. It took me half an hour to rethink it a little bit. And I think also sending in case studies, and this has nothing to do with UX or product management or anything. Sending in case studies when they're not asked for is a good way to kind of get that competitive edge. In a previous job search, because I essentially had 3 job searches in the span of 4 years. Once when I finished my PhD and then was laid off because of COVID and was laid off because of the current situation. So I'm like an expert now. But
unfortunately.
Yeah. But in one of the previous job searches, I applied for a role. I got the automatic rejection. And then I reapplied with the same CV, but I added a case study, which I had prepared already for something else. And then I got an interview.
Wow. All right. It's funny. I always just assume when you get the rejection that they just reject you outright and you can't apply again. And I don't know why I always assume that. I guess there's no reason. I never thought to reapply. That's something, here I am being a professional now for 20 something years, never thinking maybe I can just reapply again.
Yeah.
Noted. I'll put that in the show notes.
It was a really interesting role. I really wanted to interview for it. I didn't end up getting the job, but I was like, what is the worst that can happen? They reject you again.
Yeah, they just reject you again. Sure, right, yeah. They send you a dirty note like, we already rejected you once. Would you please stop applying?
Exactly.
All right, cool. Well, so I've got a few questions here that I like to ask all my guests to help my listeners get to know my guests a little bit better. You have some time to stick around, answer some silly little questions. All right, awesome. All right, first up. Well, actually, it's funny because normally I ask these to designers, and now that you're working in product management, you might have answers to all these that apply to product management, but we'll just go with it anyway. What is your favorite non-design book?
I don't really have a favorite. I like so many books.
Top 3.
Okay, so
or favorite genre. I don't know. Whatever you can.
I'm a huge fantasy nerd.
Okay.
One of my current favorite authors is Richard Kadrey. His Sandman Slim series is amazing. One of the best nonfiction books I've read recently was Cultish by Amanda Montell. It's like super fascinating about how language gets people to do crazy stuff, essentially.
All right. I love it. What is your favorite non-design podcast?
I don't really regularly listen to design podcasts, actually. I don't listen to a lot of podcasts. I'm a music person. I listen to
Okay,
like
right on.
hard rock, metal, punk, but like
Yeah.
really weird stuff. Like the weirder, the better.
Okay.
So
What's your? I'll ask you. I'm gonna throw an audible. Favorite weird punk band.
favorite
The weirder the better.
weird punk band.
You said weirder the better. I don't
Yeah.
know. The weirder the better. Whatever you just
So,
just
okay,
said. What's
so-
your favorite punk band?
Right now, I really like Hattie and the Wrath. They're like a Celtic punk band. They're not super weird. The metal stuff is weirder.
Okay.
The band Who is this like Mongolian metal band that has like traditional Mongolian throat singing and instruments and like heavy metal.
Wow.
And they have
that's
like
crazy.
collaborations with like non-Mongolian rock stars and metal. So it's really cool stuff.
That's really cool.
Yeah. But so I don't listen to a ton of podcasts, but I really love The Dream, which the first season talked about MLMs, and that's like my favorite internet rabbit hole ever. Like, I love it.
I had a buddy whose wife was doing LuLaRoe. Is that LuLaRoe, right?
Yeah.
Is that the pants one? Yeah, and he was telling me all about like the conferences they go to, and they went on a cruise, and like Katy Perry had a concert for them. And I'm like, where'd you all think all this money was coming from? Like, who's paying Katy Perry to come and like sing just to these people? It was fascinating. Anyway, they got out, but we watched the documentary on that. I think it was like either Netflix or Hulu, one of those things. Anyway, that's what is it called? The
Dream.
What was the name of the podcast again? The Dream. All right. And so each episode they do a different MLM.
No, it was.
Or is it like serialized? I guess like multiple episodes.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact structure, but it was just talking kind of more about like different issues in the industry, and it's like fascinating because it's a little bit about like business ethics, a little bit about like weird religious stuff because there's so many like ties to like Christianity or Mormonism,
like the LuLaRoe one,
like feminism and just like health and safety practices and regulation and like legal issues. It's just like, it's such an interesting topic. My family thinks I'm nuts because I talk about this stuff all the time, but it's really interesting.
Yeah, I know. I find that stuff fascinating too. I just like the psychology of how people buy into that, I think is what I'm most fascinated about, like how do people get actually tricked? Like, I don't know. Anyway, that's like sort of a ding on the people. I feel like it's the MLMs kind of taking advantage of me. But anyway, it's just fascinating.
But okay, so in this book, Cultish, one of the chapters is about MLMs and how like language kind of like wraps people up. And I remember a friend of mine, she posted something on Facebook or a WhatsApp group, something. And I made a joke about how it sounds like she joined an MLM. Turns out she joined an MLM.
Oh, no. She offended on that?
She deleted my comment.
Oh, God. Okay. Well, yeah, she was obviously offended. All right. What is your favorite meal?
Favorite meal?
This could be something you cook, you've eaten at a restaurant. It could be something your grandma cooked, your mom cooked. Or your dad, grandpa.
Back in Toronto, my mom would make duck for Rosh Hashanah every year. So that was like the highlight, the culinary highlight of the year.
Right on. All right. Duck. Oh, that sounds good. I've only had duck a few times. I haven't had duck a whole lot. What is your favorite vacation spot? I imagine being out in Israel, you guys have some awesome spots you can travel to.
We have a lot of awesome places in Israel to travel, but it's very hot here. And I'm not a heat person.
Hot, oh, no. What do you do in the summer in Israel? That's got to be...
I avoid going outside.
Stay inside. You wear ice jackets. I put ice in my pockets.
Basically. So I would say Reykjavik was just in Iceland. Just amazing.
Okay. Yeah.
It's like...
the opposite of hot to Iceland.
So, I mean, it wasn't like freezing. I was there in the summer, but it's a really small city that like everything is either like super artsy and boutique-y or like outdoor adventure-y. Like there's no in between. And I love both those things. So it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I've never been to Iceland. I recently found out Iceland is actually part of North America, but also associated with Europe, which is fascinating to me.
Iceland, in the middle of Iceland, there's this national park called Thingvellir. And in the middle, there is like a river. And the tectonic plates of North America and Europe kind of just, you can swim between them. So
that's fascinating. Yeah.
I've snorkeled between the tectonic plates of the two continents.
That's something you don't get to do every day. Is it Greenland, or maybe Greenland and Iceland both are part of Denmark, or is it?
That's Greenland.
Norway?
Iceland is
Greenland. Okay, Iceland's a separate thing. Okay, Greenland
Iceland's
is part of Denmark. Okay,
normal country.
Its own normal country. Is it in the
normal
EU?
country?
I'm not even sure. I don't know. I'm asking you like you're an expert on Iceland. Anyway, maybe you know, but I don't know. Whatever. Totally different podcast. All right. Last question. What is your favorite design tool that is not Figma?
A pencil?
Pencil. I love it. I've interviewed a bunch of people, and only a few people have said pen and paper or pencil. Most people are like, I can't do anything without Figma. I'm like, hey, really? You try? You should try. You should try sometime.
I never really used Figma.
Like I guess that's true. Yeah, because you're doing research and stuff.
I've used Figma, but just to play around with it. So I'm still in terms of tools. I mean, I just got, a license for Axure, and I love Axure. I need to like actually, sit and learn it.
It's awesome.
But I'm kind of still in the Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love Axure. It's amazing the stuff you can do with it. You can you basically can code a full functioning. you can build a database in it with tables and Excel as like a database. It's really cool. But anyway, it's really cool stuff. All right. Well, Marnina, that is it for today. Anything before we get out of here? Why don't you tell everybody where they can find you if you want people to find you?
On LinkedIn, mainly.
LinkedIn. There you go. And we'll link to your...
I don't do anything else. I mean, I use Instagram, but it's...
Yeah, if you want people following you, you might get like 5 or 6 people. I don't know.
Oh, look. I made a cocktail, and here is my house plant, and I saw a cool bug. So
I love it. You know what's funny? I can't do, I still have an Instagram account and stuff, but I haven't posted in like years. But if I did, I wouldn't know what to post on Instagram, like UX related. I know people do like the reels and stuff. They treat it almost like TikTok. I'm like, I ain't doing all that shit. No. Whatever. You just, I can't do that. It'd be pictures of my kids, pictures of my dogs, and probably pictures of random things I cook. That would be what I would put on Instagram.
I'm a true millennial. I watch TikTok on Instagram.
Sounds fun. Yeah, right. It's funny because I'm a millennial as well. I'm actually like a geriatric millennial. I don't know if you could tell. I get the gray hair in my beard here.
I'm also.
I was born in 82. I don't want to ask your age, but I was born in 82, so 86. I don't know if you're around. Okay, so I'm a bit little younger. Bit. Yeah. That's all right. But yeah, very similar. And I got Instagram really early, and then I lost interest in it really early. And same with like Facebook. Like I was on Facebook when it was the Facebook, and you had to have like an EDU thing. And then I don't know, all the new stuff, TikTok, I can't get into it. I don't know. I feel so old. I'm like, I don't belong here. This isn't my jam. I don't know. I'm sure it's fun for people, but I just, not my thing.
Yeah.
Anyway. All right. Well, Marnina, this was awesome. I'm really excited to have a chance to chat with you today. I want to have you on in a year, and we'll talk to you about your transition, your full transition into a full-fledged product manager. And I'm really stoked to see you flourish and grow and become the product manager that we know you can be. Well, all right, y'all. That's it for Marnina and I for today. I hope we helped shed a little bit of light on one woman's journey from UX design and product management. And I'm curious, anybody out there that's made that switch from design to the product management side? You went from the light side to the dark side? Let me know what you think on LinkedIn. Shoot me an email at hello@beyonduxdesign.com. I'd love to hear from you and hear all about your journey. If you like what you heard today, don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would love it if you left a 5-star review. That would help me out way more than you can imagine. And if you know somebody who might find any of this stuff useful, why don't you tell them about it? That'd be fantastic. If you want to keep the show independent and ad-free, check out all those Patreon sponsorship packages at beyonduxdesign.com/support. You can join Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, and Kevin by supporting the show for as little as $3 a month. And there are some awesome perks like that badass holographic Beyond UX Design sticker. You can get a shout out on the show every week, and there's even a package to meet with me for 30 minutes every month. You can also head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/audible trial to download Cues by Vanessa Van Edwards, get an audiobook with a free 30-day trial, cancel at any time, and the book is yours to keep forever. So get a free audiobook and help support the show. And don't forget to sign up for the newsletter and check out all the past episodes at beyonduxdesign.com. I hope you keep coming back for more great UX tips from Beyond UX Design. And until next time, remember, you're more than a designer because there's more to UX than design. I'll see you around. Take care, y'all.